Hello and welcome to the first episode of the Nomadicare Show. Yeah. Here I am with Jacob, my husband, my business partner, and I'm Laura. I'm the founder of Nomadicare. We are
Too many claps.
There's Daniel, my brother. He likes to clap.
We also have a soundboard. Yes. Yeah, we have a soundboard.
Yeah, which I'm super excited about. Sound effects make podcasts
We have
better.
voice. We have voice manipulation, so we could actually talk the whole time.
And voice manipulation.
Oh boy.
Oh, this is gonna be fun. Yep.
Yeah. And so I guess that kind of rolls into the question, like, what is the purpose of this show,
Yeah.
right?
So the purpose was, we had cooler stuff for our office. We got cool chairs. Look at our microphones.
Yep. I was really needed a mic in front of my face.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
I needed a good reason to do it.
Totally. That's pretty
Yeah.
much it. We wanted cool mics, and now we have a reason to have them.
But I mean, honestly, we wanted to share what we're up to at Nomadicare. Nomadicare is such this cool thing that exists in the world for travelers, right?
Yeah.
And there's so much that happens behind the scenes too that is so valuable for somebody new to the industry, wanting to get into the industry, a pro in the industry who wants to like really double down and scale their like career. There's so many cool things that we can talk about and go into. And also like there's so much about travel healthcare that is so nuanced, right? Like there's just an easy answer to the majority of questions. They're so particular, and nuancy is probably the best word I can think of. And we really wanted to do like a conversational format where we can really dig deep into a question or a topic or a category.
Yeah. So many times when we get a question in one of our Facebook groups or just emailed to us or texted to us, I'm like, man, I wish I could just talk to them for like 5 minutes and just say it all. Because if I type it all out, it looks psycho. Like it's so long. But you're like, but you kind of need to know this and this. And so most questions need a good like 5 minutes, which isn't that long, but it's long typing. 5 minutes to really listen and be like, oh my God, I get it. And I think after being in this industry for, at least 15 years, but then Nomadicare, 10 years, and we've done all the sides. Like I was a travel OT for a long time.
Yep.
I started Nomadicare and learned a ton, starting Nomadicare in general. So you start hearing from the collective voice of travelers, not just me and my experience. And then you start understanding the recruiter's perspective. And then as Nomadicare grew, I got to be in the rooms with the CEOs more and the leadership. I understood the perspective of the executive team and how an agency's really run, not just the recruiter perspective. So your knowledge grows and grows. And then we've gotten to experience as a business staffing ourselves in a few situations. We staffed a strike last year.
Direct contracts.
Direct contract.
We've done VMS, MSPs. Like we've done the whole gamut of things.
And
right?
so then you grow again and learn some more. And after all of that, you know so much wisdom that I really want to teach travelers, because I know when I started, I wanted to understand the industry better. And while it is nuanced, it's also simple and nuanced somehow at the same time. Yeah. And it's hard to figure out, where do you get honest answers? Where do you get answers from someone who understands more than just their perspective?
Yep.
And you can see the passion and the confidence in a lot of Facebook answers. And we can read that and be like, wow, if I was a new traveler, I would think that was true, the way they answered that so confidently. But we would know from all of our real world experience, that is not true. Yeah. So it's a good place. I think I would love this to be a place I get to share a lot of the knowledge I've learned. In a fun way, a conversational way with you, with questions that come from our community, so we can give value and people can listen and learn a lot about the industry, you know, in bite-sized pieces.
Yeah, that's a huge goal, is to answer questions from our community. We literally get, like, no joke, dozens of questions each day, whether it's the Facebook groups, the emails, the live chat, the whatever it comes through, the text line, like so many forms of questions that come our way. So this is a great way, I think, to answer those questions, but then give the answer to everybody all at once, right?
Totally.
Versus just like replying to one comment or sending one message. And we still do those things, right? But I think it's a great way to kind of broadcast really great questions to the entire community.
Yeah.
And as like the community, you guys can ask us questions. Not only can you just ask them wherever we're at, you can go to nomadicare.com/show and ask your questions directly to us. And we can answer the questions here on the podcast, right? So that's some of the big goals for the show. And then, we'll have fun with it too. It just won't be like Q&A all the time. We get to play around with reactions to certain things that happen or predictions or just have fun with it,
Yeah. Maybe we'll give you some behind the scenes scoop of how some things work. We'll have some fun, but mostly, honestly, we just wanted cool mics.
Yes. Yeah. Again, I just wanted the mic in front of my face, and I wanted the voice. I wanted to be able to
really get deep into topics.
That is so creepy.
Yep. So I finally got the deep voice after 33
years on this. Oh, there it goes.
All right. Okay. You're fired.
And there goes our sound person.
It's gonna be entertaining regardless.
Yeah.
So please, wherever you're listening to this show, if it's on a podcast app, subscribe. If it's on YouTube, subscribe again. If it's randomly on some random social media site or wherever you see it, find us somewhere, subscribe. All right. Just like follow us and follow this show so you can get the latest episodes. Who knows the trajectory of where this thing goes, whether we do live shows during meetups with travelers. There's so many, we have such a large, empowered, active community. I would love to really just keep providing value. I mean, that's one of our core principles at Nomadicare, right? Is what we're doing, providing value to our community.
Yeah.
And we think through that lens with whatever we do. And so that's what we want to do with the show. And so whatever comes to mind, let us know. You're a part of this just like anyone else.
It's totally true. If you have an idea or a thought, even as the show progresses, if you write it in, me and Jacob are literally going to talk about it and consider it. You will be a part of what this becomes. And
I thought your assistant was going to look at all the...
My assistant.
Yeah. Which
one?
One?
Is that Leo, my 4-month-old?
Yes,
Our 4-month-old baby is my assistant. Yeah. So send it in. We'll literally read it. We'll talk about it. We'll think about it because this will be evolving. And we hope to just have some fun and for sure add value and knowledge to travelers, our favorite people in the world.
So that being said, we got some questions. Let's jump right into it.
1, 2, 1, 2, 3.
All right, first question. First question comes from Megan. If agencies have the same bill rate, why do they have different pay packages for the same job?
Oh, that's a great question. Thank you for asking your question, Megan. So I'm going to start a little bit big picture, and then we can dive into the different reasons this happens all the time. Big picture, bill rate is going to be the amount of money that the hospital is paying for a traveler to come work for them. It's paid per hour, and it's paid straight to the staffing agency. The staffing agency takes that bill rate amount of money, and they keep some of it to run their business, and then what's left over is considered the pay rate. That's what we get. So here we are at the pay rate, and Megan's probably looking at job boards or even talking to different recruiters and sees the same job, and she's being offered 2 different pay packages.
Mm-hmm.
First thing I'm going to, there's so many different avenues we can go with this. There's so many reasons this happens. Number 1 is probably where are you getting that information, potentially. So if she's looking at job boards, one thing that I know we can relate to and we see very strongly at Nomadicare is job boards are not always exact pay packages. A lot of times they're estimates. So if Megan is just looking at job boards and trying to compare pay packages, when she talks to the actual recruiter, it might actually be higher or lower than what it says on the job board. Also, sometimes job boards will post in the net amount, what she'll get after taxes. And sometimes it's posted for the gross amount, what she makes before taxes, and that can be confusing. Sometimes it includes benefits, sometimes it doesn't. So I would say number 1 thing for people to look at is, are you comparing apples to apples? Are you actually seeing the full true pay package when everything is actually combined and set in the same way?
Okay.
So
So like a gross weekly estimate.
It's a
right?
great way to look at it.
It's a very common way to job boards display is like
Yeah.
how much is the estimated gross for this job. But what if estimated grosses are different for the same job? Why would that be?
Yeah. Well, so then it comes down to somebody typically really is paying more or less than the other one, even when you're comparing. It's just sometimes the difference isn't as big as it seems on job boards. But when it comes to that, then there is one reason that could be the staffing agency just takes more than the other staffing agency. They have different profit margins.
Mm-hmm.
And so that could be one reason. Another reason could be because they actually have different bill rates that they're playing with. So let's say one company has a direct relationship with that hospital. They actually get the full bill rate. And then if they can't find a traveler to get in that spot, the next staffing agencies, they all get essentially a different bill rate. They have to pay that first.
You're talking about what like a VMS, right? Where agencies may have to pay a fee to staff you in that job, where the company who has that direct relationship does not have to pay a fee.
Yeah,
So
pretty much. Yeah.
Say for easy math, because I'm not good at math, if the bill rate was $100, agency one would have a $100 bill rate, but say the agency two had to pay a 3% fee, they'd have a $97 bill rate.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So they could start with different amounts. So even if they're both taking 20% cut, one of them can pay more.
Yeah.
Now, in reality, that's not how it goes. A lot of times that second tier staffing agency that is only starting with $97, many times they pay more than that first one that has the $100 bill rate in that example, because the top one keeps more money and the bottom one has, the other one, the $97 one, has lower overhead expenses. So a lot of times it comes to how much is the agency keeping versus how much are they paying you as the traveler.
Yeah,
What-
there's
yeah.
margins. Things that come to my mind are margins, overhead costs, and fees.
Mhm.
Those are probably the most common things that I've seen. There's also that plays off the margins is the individual recruiter, right? Like testing the waters to see what they can start with, and then maybe they start real low on an offer, right? That's saying like, hey, I can probably get someone to take this job for $1,900 a week, but I know I can go up to $2,100 a week versus agency, D or whatever, the recruiter just maybe like, hey, I can give $2,100 a week. I need to fill this role right away. I'm going to post $2,100. And so as a traveler, you say, why is that one $1,900? This one's $2,100.
Yeah.
Could just be the recruiting style too. So, I mean,
Yeah. And
yeah.
the recruiters right now are definitely still salespeople
Mhm.
in the industry, in almost all the staffing agencies.
Yeah.
There's some exceptions. And so with that, the recruiter is a salesperson and they're incentivized to get you in a job, mostly because they get a commission. And so, yeah, a lot of times they know the company would love to have more profits, of course. They're also wanting you to say yes to the job. So that's where the negotiation might come in and why you'll see different pay rates, because different recruiters will try different tactics. And then you as the traveler might have to negotiate to get that,
Yeah.
a different pay.
Yeah. I've also seen, because we run a marketplace of jobs, dozens of agencies, right? And I've even seen trends where staffing agencies are not technology companies. They're not great mathematicians, right? They're not extremely well versed at calculating a very accurate pay package. And so what I've seen happen is like they kind of have these systems for calculating estimates instead of like trying to find the exact amount. And so you'll see a lot of jobs that are like bucketed within this pay range. So if it's like a PT in Northern California in outpatient, it's typically bucketed in this estimate, right? Where then once you talk to that recruiter, the recruiter then goes, okay, cool. Here's the actual bill rate. Here's the actual target margin we're trying to get as an agency. Here's the costs associated with this job, the overhead costs, right? So yeah, there's so many factors that go into it. But yeah, Megan, it was a good question. I mean, different margins from agencies. You were talking about overhead costs of agencies. And what we mean by overhead costs, right, is if it's a 3-person agency, your costs are literally low, right? You only have 3 recruiters on staff. You probably have a small office or you're a remote team. But if you're a giant mega staff agency, you may have hundreds and hundreds of recruiters. You may have multiple giant offices across the nation, right? Like a lot of expenses. And so then you have to pay for that, right? And so then you bake in your cost to do business into how do you calculate a pay package for a traveler. And so that's always like the give and take, right? Do you go work for a big giant agency who has access to a ton of jobs but has higher overhead costs and probably higher margins? Or do you go to the boutique smaller agencies that maybe have lower overhead costs and give a little bit back to the agency, but they don't have as many jobs, right? They maybe just have a couple in a small little geographic area. So,
and I will say that is quite there's a little bit of truth to that, but it's also a bit of a stereotype because a lot of the times what we see too with our data is sometimes the really big companies do pay well. And some of the small companies that you think you're brand new, like you need something to attract the travelers to work with you over a company with lots of jobs. Sometimes they pay worse margins. And what's interesting, we've done a little bit of staffing at Nomadicare with strikes and stuff like that, just enough to kind of see for ourselves. Workers' comp cost a lot more when you're brand new than once you've done it for a while. They'll give you discounts because they can see how you run your business. So it's more expensive at first when you have less people because you have to pay this huge liability, whether you have 100 people working or 10 people that year, huge liability bill. And then the other thing, health insurance is so expensive to offer when you're small and it gets cheaper with scale. So there's also a lot of things that cost a lot of money when you're small. And if you don't staff a lot of people, it's more expensive per person. So I think there is
economies of scale, right?
Totally. And then some of the biggest companies are publicly traded. So they have to have a certain profit margin for their stockholders. Some other huge companies are privately owned. They can pay more. So I think it's just, I hear that a lot, especially with newer travelers. Like the small companies will pay more, the big companies pay worse, but we don't find that correlation to be perfect. So I would be careful if you are a new traveler and you're thinking about this. Don't think, I won't work with the huge companies because they don't pay as well. A lot of times they do, and they've got tons of jobs, and they're worth talking to as well.
Amazing point. Cool.
Yeah.
Great question, Megan.
Yeah, thanks, Megan.
1, 2, 1, 2, 3. Na, 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 na.
All right. Next question comes from Rez. Why do companies not max out housing and meal stipends based on the available amount found on GSA.gov?
Oh, perfect. Okay. So this question, I'm going to give a slight backstory or a slight background of what this is. So when you are a travel healthcare worker and you follow a couple of rules, you get this amazing perk, tax-free money. And it's one of the reasons a lot of people want to become travelers. The way it works is depending on where you travel to in the country, there is a different amount that the government says, not the staffing agency, the government says on a public website that we can all see. This is the maximum amount you can pay that traveler per day for this season. It might even be different for winter to summer per day for per diems. And per diems, also called stipends sometimes, that's what we get as travelers to help us pay for two different things. There's meals and incidentals, and then there's housing.
Yep.
And so when travelers look at this website sometimes or get started, they might think, okay, the government said I should get $150 a day, whatever it is, $100 a day. That's what I'm owed. I am entitled this much money because I'm going to this zip code.
Yeah, why not? If the government says, hey, you can give this person up to $100 a day and tax-free money for housing, why not give it the money?
Yeah. And what you'll find is when you look at pay package breakdowns, it is very common for them not to be maxed out. And so sometimes people think, hey, I'm getting ripped off. That's not fair. So here's the reason why. There is the bill rate, and that bill rate is the amount of money that the staffing agencies have to work with. So depending on what that bill rate is, what the hospital or facility is willing to pay for the traveler, that's all they have to play with. And so if the bill rate is too low, the norms of our industry, they can't max out certain regions and give the most.
Yeah.
So typically how the agencies do it is they'll get a bill rate, they'll take the cut that they need to run their business, and then there's this leftover amount. And in that leftover amount, they first take out money for the taxable wages. They need to do that first. They're supposed to pay somewhere around what they'll call a reasonable cost or a reasonable payment for that specialty, taxable. So they can't drop it down to minimum wage or anything like that. They need to have a standard to say, look, physical therapists are this much taxable as a minimum that we'll go off of. A lot of times what we see in the industry is $18 to $20 an hour is the minimum an agency will go. So they'll do that first. All right, you got your $20 an hour, and then they'll look what's left. How much money is left? Then they'll take some out for travel from point A to point B to get to your location. Then they might take some out to pay for your licensure and to pay for your labs. And then whatever's left over after all of that, that's what's left for tax-free money and stipends. So they'll take all of that, as much as they can, and they'll put it all there. If for some reason you have a great bill rate and they max out the stipends, then the rest of that money will go back to the taxable wages. And that's when you might get $25 an hour, $30 an hour. But I think what's really important to know when you're thinking about your staffing agencies, you guys have aligned incentives. They want to pay you as much tax-free money as they can, just like you want as much tax-free money as you can get, because they don't pay payroll taxes on it and you don't pay taxes on it. So they don't have like an incentive to not max that out. The only reason they wouldn't is because the bill rate doesn't support that. That's almost always the reason why.
That's like a super common thing I see on social media specifically. My recruiter's out to get me. They didn't max out my stipends. It's like, no. They want to do that.
Yeah.
There's another factor in there that is not allowing the stipends to be maxed out.
Yeah. And it's a lot to explain that to someone. So recruiters are just going to give you a pay package and you might be confused, but yeah, they're going to put as much money in tax-free places that they can while being safe and not making your taxable rate too low, because the IRS would not like that, if they were just paying minimum wage for a physical therapist.
Yeah, or zero in taxable.
Just giving you all stipends.
Yeah. So then I guess, let me see if I understand it correctly. There's the amount of money we have to work with is the bill rate. That's the only money. It's the only money that exists, right? A portion of that bill rate goes to the agency, their margin, their cut. Another part of that goes to the taxable wages. There's a minimum taxable amount that they have to pay you in order to stay kind of like kosher with the IRS. And then there are things like reimbursements for travel, reimbursements for licensure, maybe a scrubs reimbursement or something like that, or CEUs. There's like reimbursements they give you to kind of get started. And then the remaining they are able to put towards your stipends, towards your housing and meals. And then they try to max that out. And most of the time, the bill rate doesn't allow all those to get filled in appropriately. But if it does, if they do max it out, it then goes back to the taxable wages. Is that kind of a good summary?
Yeah, you nailed it. It was perfect. Yep.
And I'll add one more. You know what I think I've seen the last couple of years with COVID specifically, right? It started with nursing, right? All the bill rate, nursing respiratory, right? Bill rates went through the roof. And so you had these huge pay packages and they had no problem maxing out stipends. Then later on that trickled towards therapy, right? And once kind of the surgery started happening and rehab and the schools opened up, then you have the high bill rates for therapy. So everyone, for a brief moment in time there, for a couple of years, we're getting a lot of maxed out stipends. And so I think now you're having that kind of trickle down where rates are decreasing. And so you're not maxing out the stipends as often as you were. And then it's probably even worse for brand new travelers, right? They're like, wait. My last contract, I had maxed out stipends. Now I don't. I'm getting ripped off.
Yeah.
Versus maybe an OG traveler, right? Where you're like, oh, okay, this is more like 2019, back to normal.
Totally. Because the market is always in cycles. Sometimes there's hardly any jobs for travel therapists or travel nurses. And then sometimes there's so many jobs. It's a cycle. And yeah, you're right. People who have done it for a long time, they just see the cycles and they kind of ride those waves.
Yep.
And then, new people who maybe got into it during those amazing rates in COVID might feel like, oh, this is what I deserve or what I was worth. But the market's correcting now that we're not in a crisis pay moment.
Yeah.
And they might be more confused about why those stipends aren't getting maxed out. Totally.
Perfect. Awesome. Great question.
1, 2, 1, 2, 3.
Our next question comes from April. Why do the majority of companies not cover realistic expenses of traveling to an assignment that's far away? And so I guess she's asking, why, if I got to go from Florida to Washington, it costs me $2,000, my company's only going to give me $500 in travel reimbursements? How would you answer that?
Yeah, perfect. Well, typically agencies will have a bucket of money that is reserved for travelers to help them pay for their travel from where they're traveling from to their next assignment.
Yep.
Most companies will have a cap and they'll say, we will reimburse up to $500. Sometimes they'll go up to $1,000, but the bigger it gets, one of the other things you might see is they'll give you half of it on your first paycheck and half of it on your last paycheck. So the reason for this, and the reason that number doesn't get huge almost ever, is because that is a risk that the staffing agency is taking before you ever work. And unfortunately, there are travelers who will say yes to an assignment and then just not show up or cancel after just 1 week because something else great came up. And after, if let's say you were a staffing agency and you got burned a few times where maybe at first you were giving them a lot of tax-free money on that travel, and then the traveler didn't show up and you just lost a lot of money, or they only worked 2 weeks. And as a staffing agency, you realize it takes quite a few weeks to actually become profitable on a traveler because you're putting a lot of your own money up front, trusting that the traveler will fulfill their contract, work their hours, not call out sick too much, all of these things for them to eventually, by the end of that 13 weeks, make the amount they thought they would make to run their business.
Yeah.
That's pretty much the reason. They want to give you an amount that is a fair risk for them, where if you didn't show up, it wouldn't devastate them, I guess, but also enough to give you a perk. And typically that comes on your first paycheck. So if you don't start at all, you won't get anything. After you work that first week, you'll usually get your travel reimbursement on the first paycheck. So that first paycheck is more exciting, and it probably helps you cover things like your deposit for where you're staying and pay you back for some of those travel expenses. And then you always have things you have to buy when you go to new places, restock the pantry and stuff. So it does help a lot, but it's not going to be a crazy amount because you've got to work.
Yeah, I mean,
for them to get paid back.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but they're essentially paying you money that you're going to make up front. And they're saying like, hey, we understand it's expensive to relocate.
Yeah.
It's expensive to drive and pack your stuff and put a down payment on a place, all this stuff. We're going to give you a little bit of the money you would have made on this 13-week contract, and we're going to give it to you up front. And if they give too much money up front, not only could the traveler cancel or something happen or a death in the family, whatever the thing is, the facility could cancel.
Or the
right?
facility, the facility could cancel.
Anything could happen. And imagine giving somebody $2,000 up front and then it gets canceled day 2, right?
Yeah.
And you're like, well, the agency eats that money, right?
Yeah.
Like the traveler doesn't have to pay it back.
Even if a traveler works 1 week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks, it's still not enough time for them to make up for that money.
Totally.
Staffing agencies are in the hole, paying more money than you've earned back for them essentially for quite a few weeks.
Yeah.
So when you get that first paycheck, the staffing agency makes nothing. They're in the negative. The second paycheck, they've made nothing yet. They're in the negative. So you do have to work.
Agencies only get paid when you work.
Yeah.
So if they think of it like a graph, right? Like if they pay you a travel reimbursement up front, they're in the hole, right? And they have paid workers' comp, liability insurance, paid the recruiter, all that stuff, right? So they're in the hole. And you start working and say this is break even. It's like 1 week, 2 week, 3 week, 4 week, 5 week. And then they start breaking in the profitability.
Yeah.
And that's how they kind of make their money. Gave you so much money up front, it's going to go way long to break even, extremely risky. Say you have hundreds of travelers on assignment. It's a very risky business move, right?
Yeah. And it happens all the time. Travelers leaving early or facilities canceling early. So I think it's good that the traveler does get a boost, because if the facility cancels on them, a traveler took the risk to go there, hoping the facility would do it. So it's kind of a shared risk. Yeah.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but it's kind of like the same, there's pots of money, right? There's the bill rate, and then it goes to your taxable wages. It goes to the cut of the agency. A little bit goes to your housing. If you put too much in the reimbursement bucket, you won't have enough money for housing.
Well, that's a good point. It's all essentially getting prepaid. If they didn't give you any money for travel, they should have $500 or $1,000, whatever it was, more money to put into your pay package and your stipend. So the money is just in another bucket that's essentially making your full picture of what your pay package is, which is another thing to keep in mind when you're comparing pay packages. Is if you're getting $1,000 from one company and $500 from another, it's a part of your collective pay package. So to pay attention to the little pots of money and add all your pots of money up when you're actually figuring out how much you're getting paid for an assignment, not just overemphasizing what your taxable rate is or something like that.
Yeah. And I mean, it's a great time to plug, but that's hard math to do, right? Especially if you're comparing multiple offers. So you have 3 or 4 offers and you have all this different stuff.
Yeah.
Company A is 500, company B is 750, but company C does this much, whatever the case is. We actually have a tool. It's called the Fair Pay Calculator, right? And so if you go to nomadicare.com, go up to free resources, click the fair pay calculator, you can actually type in all this information, right? And so then you can compare, like Laura was saying, apples to apples and kind of see the total numbers and kind of break it down so it's easy to compare multiple offers and see what's the total value of an offer versus this one has a higher number here, that one has a lower number there. You can kind of like see the overall picture.
It puts it in a good summary. And my favorite part about that tool is it teaches you how to negotiate too.
Yeah.
So you can put in your stuff and the page that shows you the summaries of everything will show you parts that you might want to negotiate.
Yeah. And
too.
I mean, negotiating on extensions is so related to reimbursements for travel and licensure, right? Because if you extend at a facility, well, that's easy money to negotiate for your extension in your next contract is because, well, I don't need to travel. I don't need to get another license. And so if they gave you that money up front, you should move that money back over to your total comp, right? Like you should make that money back.
Yeah, you should. If they gave you $1,000 for travel, you extended, that $1,000 is either going to go to the staffing agency or you got to ask them, put it in my pay package. Otherwise you're essentially taking a pay decrease if you think of it that way.
The best part about the fair pay calculator that I love is it will actually tell you the dollar amount to negotiate for based on what you put in for all of your reimbursements.
Yeah, it's a great
it will
tool.
literally be like, oh, you need to negotiate $1.75 raise per hour for this extension. So it's like saves you a ton of time, ton of headache, and you have data. Like data is
a powerful tool for getting what you want to. If you can explain why you deserve that to the recruiter, you're much more likely to get it.
If there's one thing that you learn from this podcast is just going to learn data is going to be your best friend, right? And Nomadicare helps you see that data in a transparent way so then you can negotiate and make decisions with some kind of like substance, right? Like with data. Like you actually know the number instead of saying, I want more money or like this person's paying me unfairly. Like how do you actually know this stuff and what actions do you take on it and how do you negotiate? Like use numbers and it increases your odds a lot. Cool. Great question.
Thank you so much for hanging with us for episode 1. We did it. And hopefully you learned something, had some fun, and please subscribe to the YouTube channel if you're watching there or subscribe on podcast. We have lots more episodes coming soon.
Yep. And again, the easiest way to get involved with the show is to ask a question. And you can ask a question at nomadicare.com/show. There'll be a little button there to ask a question. That's the easiest way to get featured on the show. And you get a little call out.
Awesome. See you on the next episode.
All right. Bye.
Nice to meet you, hello. Never been here before, but I feel like I'm home. Yeah. Put my feet on the road. Meet me over the coast. We got places to go. Yeah.